The suitcase was small, made of a faded blue fabric that had seen better days, but for Maya, it held her entire world. Inside were 3 mismatched outfits, a pair of sneakers with thinning soles, and a drawing of a house she had made when she was 6. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the group home, her hands tucked under her thighs to stop them from shaking. She was 10 years old. And today was the day her life was supposed to start for real. The hallways of the facility, which usually smelled like floor wax and old soup. But today, everything felt sharper, more vivid. Downstairs, a car was idling. It wasn't just any car. It was a long black SUV that looked like it belonged to a high-ranking official or a movie star. Maya looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the dresser. She tried to smooth down her hair. She wanted to look like the kind of girl someone would want to keep. When the door finally opened, it wasn't the social worker who entered, but a woman named Helena. Helena didn't walk. She glided. She wore a coat the color of cream and smelled like expensive flowers and cold air. She didn't hug Mayash. She didn't even touch her, but she smiled a bright, practiced smile that reached her teeth, but didn't quite make it to her eyes. "Are you ready, dear?" Helena asked. Her voice was like silk. "Mr. Sterling is waiting in the car. We have a very big day ahead of us." Maya nodded quickly, clutching the handle of her blue suitcase. She wanted to say thank you, but her throat felt like it was filled with sand. She followed Helena down the stairs, passing the other kids who peered through the cracked doorways. Some looked jealous. Others just looked tired. Maya felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of hope. She was the lucky one. She was being chosen as they stepped outside. The transition was jarring. The neighborhood around the home was gray and crumbling, but the interior of the Sterling's car was a different universe. It was quiet, leather-scented, and cool. Mr. Sterling was on his phone, his thumb moving rapidly over the screen. He looked up briefly as Maya climbed into the back seat, giving her a nod that felt more like a business greeting than a welcome. "Right on time," he said to Helena. Not to Maya. "The photographer will be at the house by 4. We need her cleaned up and in the navy blue dress by then." Maya sat as still as a statue. She looked out the tinted window as the city's skyline began to change. The cramped apartments and corner stores faded away, replaced by wide boulevards and trees that looked perfectly manicured. She wondered if she was allowed to touch the leather seats, or if her hands were too dirty. "Is the house far?" Maya whispered, her voice cracking. Helena looked back from the front seat, tilting her head. "Just far enough to be private, Maya. It's a beautiful place. You'll have your own wing, a view of the gardens, and everything a girl could want. We've spent a lot of time preparing for this. It's a very important transition for our family." The word family sent a warm glow through Maya's chest. She had spent years imagining what that word meant. To her, it meant someone to check on you when you had a fever. It meant a light left on in the hallway. It meant belonging to someone. She didn't realize then that to the Sterling's family was a brand. She was the newest piece of marketing. When they finally pulled through the iron gates of the estate, Maya gasped. The house was white stone and glass, rising up from the green grass like a palace. It didn't look like a place where people lived. It looked like a place where things were displayed. "Inside, quickly," Mr. Sterling said, checking his watch as he stepped out of the car. "We're on a schedule." Maya carried her blue suitcase up the marble steps. She felt tiny, like an ant crawling across a dinner plate. A woman in a uniform met them at the door and immediately reached for Maya's bag. "I can carry it," Maya said, holding on tight. "Give it to her, Maya," Helena said firmly, but softly. "That old thing doesn't belong in your new room. We've bought you all new things. Clothes, shoes, toys. Everything is waiting for you." Maya let go of the handle. As she watched the woman carry her blue suitcase away, she felt a sudden sharp chill. It was as if her old life was being erased before she even had a chance to say goodbye to it. She was standing in a palace, surrounded by luxury, but for the first time that day, a small, quiet voice in the back of her head asked if she had made a mistake. She pushed the thought away. This is what you wanted, she told herself. This is the dream. She followed Helena through the great hall, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. Every wall was covered in art, and every table held a vase of fresh lilies. It was perfect. It was silent. It was exactly what Maya thought love looked like. She had no idea that the silence was a warning, or that the walls had ears. She had no idea that she had been brought here to fill a hole in a contract, not a hole in a heart. The house was always quiet. But it was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the air before a big storm. Maya had lived with the Sterlings for 3 months now. Her room was bigger than the entire group home she had come from, and her closet was full of dresses that cost more than a car. But she still felt like a guest who hadn't been told when to leave. She spent most of her time trying to be invisible. She learned which floorboards creaked and which doors stayed shut. She learned that Mr. Sterling liked his coffee at exactly 6 a.m., and that Helena didn't like to be looked at before she had put on her makeup. It was a Tuesday evening, and the house felt especially cold. A heavy rain was tapping against the tall glass windows, making the shadows in the hallway stretch and wiggle. Maya was sitting on her bed, trying to read a book about stars, but she couldn't focus. She felt a nagging hunger in her stomach. It wasn't that they didn't feed her. It was just that dinner was always so small and formal, more about how the table looked than how the food tasted. She decided to sneak down to the kitchen to see. She could find a piece of fruit or some bread. She put on her slippers and crept out of her room. The hallway was dark, lit only by the small glowing lights near the floor. As she reached the top of the grand staircase, she heard voices coming from the study below. The door wasn't shut all the way. A thin slice of yellow light spilled out onto the marble floor. Maya stopped. Usually, she would have turned back, but something about the tone of the voices caught her ear. It wasn't the polite, soft tone the Sterlings used when they were around her. It was sharp. It was angry. I'm telling you, the board is already asking questions. Mr. Sterling's voice boomed. It sounded different, harder. The image of the happy family is the only thing keeping the investors from pulling out after that legal mess last year. We need to keep the girl front and center for at least another 6 months. Maya froze. Her heart started to drum against her ribs so hard it hurt. She leaned closer to the railing, her breath catching in her throat. I know that, Arthur, Helena snapped back. But she's so ... bland. She doesn't smile enough in the photos. I'm spending thousands on her wardrobe and tutors, and she still looks like a deer in headlights. It's exhausting to play the doting mother all day when there's no natural spark there. It doesn't matter if there's a spark, Mr. Sterling replied, and Maya heard the clink of ice against a glass. We don't need her to be happy. We just need her to look the part. Once the inheritance from your father's estate is finalized and the trust fund is secured under the family clause, we can figure out what to do with her. Until then, she is the most expensive piece of furniture in this house. Treat her like one. Maya felt like the floor had suddenly turned into water. She reached out to grab the banister to keep from falling. The words expensive piece of furniture echoed in her head. She thought about the way Helena had tucked her in the night before, smiling and calling her sweetheart. She thought about the way Mr. Sterling had patted her on the shoulder after the last newspaper interview. It was all a lie. All of it. What if she figures it out? Helena asked, her voice sounding bored. She's a quiet one, but she's observant. She's a child from the system, Helena, Mr. Sterling said with a cold laugh. She has nowhere else to go. Even if she knew, she'd stay. She likes the fancy bed and the expensive food too much to complain. These kids are all the same. They'll put up with anything for a taste of the high life. Just keep her quiet and keep the cameras moving. We only need to hold it together for a little while longer. Maya backed away from the railing, her slippers making no sound on the thick carpet. She felt a strange heat rising in her face, followed by a bone-deep cold. She wasn't a daughter. She wasn't even a person to them. She was a line in a contract. She was a tool they were using to get money. She made it back to her room and shut the door, leaning her back against the wood. She looked at the beautiful room, the soft pillows, and the gold-framed pictures on the wall. Suddenly, the room didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a cage. She walked over to the closet and looked at the navy blue dress she was supposed to wear for the garden party the next day. She realized now why they were so careful about her hair and her skin. They weren't taking care of her. They were maintaining their property. She didn't cry. The tears were there, heavy and hot behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down. If she was a piece of furniture, then she would be the most silent, most observant piece of furniture they had ever seen. She realized that every word she had heard was a weapon she could use. They thought she was just a kid who wanted a taste of the high life. They didn't realize that Maya had lived through things much scarier than a couple of greedy adults. She sat down on the floor, not the bed, but the hard, cold floor, and began to think. She had heard every word, and because she had heard every word, the Sterlings no longer owned her. They just didn't know it yet. The sun rose over the estate the next morning, but for Maya, the light felt different. It didn't feel warm or welcoming anymore. It felt like a spotlight on a stage where she was forced to perform. She stood in front of the tall bathroom mirror, scrubbing her face. She looked at her eyes and wondered if the Sterlings would be able to see the change in her. She wondered if the secret she was carrying and the weight of every word she had heard through that door would make her look different to them. She dressed slowly. She chose a simple sweater and jeans, avoiding the fancy dresses Helena usually picked out. She wanted to feel like herself, even if herself was someone the Sterlings didn't really care about. When she walked down to the breakfast room, the smell of burnt toast and expensive coffee filled the air. Helena was sitting at the head of the table, tapping her manicured nails against a tablet screen. She didn't look up when Maya entered. "You're late for breakfast, Maya," Helena said, her voice flat. "And why are you wearing those rags?" "We have the foundation members coming over for lunch. You need to look presentable." "I was tired," Maya said quietly. She sat down and poured herself a bowl of cereal. She watched the way Helena's lip curled slightly at the sound of her voice. "Well, make sure you change after you eat," Helena replied, "and try to put some life into your face. You look like you haven't slept in a week. We can't have people thinking we aren't taking good care of you." "Taking care of me," Maya thought. The words felt like lead in her stomach. She realized that every kind thing Helena did was actually a calculation. The vitamins on the table weren't for Maya's health. They were to make sure her skin looked good for the cameras. The tutors weren't for Maya's future. They were so the Sterlings could brag about having a gifted child. For the next few weeks, Maya became an expert at a new game. She called it the ghost game. She realized that if she was quiet enough and did exactly what she was told, the Sterlings would stop paying attention to her. They would talk openly in front of her as if she were a piece of the wall. She started to spend her afternoons in the library, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling shelves that smelled like old paper and leather. The Sterlings never went in there. They only used it as a background for their holiday cards. In the library, Maya began her own education. She didn't study the math problems her tutor gave her. Instead, she started looking through the filing cabinets in the back of the room. One afternoon, while Mr. Sterling was out at the golf club and Helena was at a spa, Maya found what she was looking for. Tucked inside a folder labeled Estate Management were papers with her own name on them. Her heart raced as she flipped through the pages. She saw the adoption decree, but she also saw something else, a bank document. It detailed a massive inheritance that would only be unlocked if the household was maintained with a legal heir. For a period of 5 years, she wasn't just a prop for their image. She was a key. She was the person holding the door open to a fortune they hadn't earned. Maya felt a sudden surge of power. For years, she had felt like a victim of the system, someone who was moved around like a chess piece. But now she held the board. She knew their secret, and she knew her own value. They needed her far more than she needed them. She began to change her behavior. She didn't become rebellious or loud. She became carefully useful. When the foundation members came for lunch, she spoke clearly and smiled at the right times. She saw the relief in Helena's eyes. But every time Helena patted her hand in front of a guest, Maya felt a cold spark of fire inside her. She was counting the days. She was observing every move they made. She also started to prepare for her own escape, even though she was only 10. Every time Helena gave her allowance for being good during a photo shoot, Maya didn't spend it on toys or candy. She tucked the bills into the lining of her blue suitcase, which she had hidden in the back of her closet. She started taking small, non-perishable snacks from the pantry granola bars. dried fruit, crackers, and hiding them too. She met a man named Mr. Henderson who came to work on the gardens twice a week. He was an older man with rough hands and a kind face. He was the only person in the house who didn't look at Maya like she was a project. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders, little one," Mr. Henderson said one day while he was pruning the rose bushes. Maya looked around to make sure Helena wasn't watching from the balcony. "I'm just thinking," she said. "Thinking is good," Mr. Henderson smiled. "But don't forget to breathe. Plants need air to grow, and so do people. Don't let the shadows in this house grow over you." Maya nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. Mr. Henderson didn't know the truth, but he knew the feeling of the house. He knew it was a place where things were grown for show, not for love. As the months turned into a year, Maya's life became a double act. By day, she was the perfect, grateful daughter of the Sterling family. She wore the dresses, she played the piano, and she stood for the pictures. But by night, she was a strategist. She watched the way Mr. Sterling handled his business calls. She listened to the way they argued about money. When they thought she was asleep, she realized that the Sterlings were actually quite fragile. Their entire lifestyle was built on a deck of cards, debt, lies, and the family image she provided. If she left, the cards would fall. The realization was terrifying. But it was also the first time Maya felt like she had a choice. She wasn't a piece of furniture. She was the foundation of their house, and one day she was going to walk away and watch the whole thing crumble. The years at the estate did not pass quickly. For Maya, every day felt like a long, slow walk on a tightrope. She was no longer the small, wide-eyed girl who had arrived with a blue suitcase. She was now 15, taller, and much more observant. Her face had learned how to stay perfectly still even when her heart was racing. She had become an expert at the family business. She knew exactly which smile to use for a magazine cover and which polite laugh to give when one of Mr. Sterling's business partners made a boring joke. But inside, the fire she had started as a 10-year-old was burning hotter than ever. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning. The Sterlings had changed too. As the deadline for the trust fund inheritance drew closer, they became more nervous. Mr. Sterling spent more time behind the closed door of his study, his voice getting louder and more stressed during his late-night phone calls. Helena had grown colder, her eyes constantly scanning Maya for any sign of rebellion. They treated her like a ticking time bomb that they just needed to keep quiet for a few more years. The only place Maya felt like she could breathe was in the far corner of the gardens. That was where the old greenhouse stood, a place the Sterlings ignored because it wasn't modern enough for their taste. It was also where Mr. Henderson worked. One afternoon, Maya escaped a particularly grueling fitting for a gala dress. Her skin felt itchy from the lace, and her head throbbed from the tight bun Helena had insisted on. She ran to the greenhouse, the cool air smelling of damp earth and mint. "You're hiding again," Mr. Henderson said, without looking up from the tray of seedlings he was tending. "I'm not hiding," Maya said. Leaning against the wooden frame of the door, "I'm retreating." "There's a difference." The old man chuckled, his weathered face wrinkling like a map. "A strategic retreat. I like that. You've been doing a lot of that lately. You're getting older, Maya. The bird is getting too big for the cage, isn't it?" Maya looked at him sharply. Mr. Henderson was the only person who ever spoke the truth out loud. "They don't see me as a bird, Mr. Henderson. They see me as a golden key. If I break, they can't open the door to the money they want." Mr. Henderson stopped what he was doing and looked at her. His eyes were kind, but they were also sad. "I've worked for a lot of people like them, Maya. They think you can own things that grow. They think you can own a person just by putting a roof over their head. But they forget that roots go deep. They don't know what you've been growing in that head of yours." "I have enough saved to get a bus ticket and a place to stay for a month," Maya whispered. It was the first time she had told anyone her secret. "But I have to wait until I'm 18. If I leave now, the police will just bring me back here. And then they'll lock the cage even tighter." "You're smart," Mr. Henderson said, nodding slowly. "Patience is a hard thing to learn, but it's the most powerful tool you have. In the meantime, you need to learn things they can't take away from you. They can take your clothes, they can take your room, but they can't take what you know." Over the next 2 years, the greenhouse became Maya's classroom. while the expensive tutors the Sterlings hired taught her how to speak French and analyze stocks. Mr. Henderson taught her how to survive. He taught her how to grow food in small spaces, how to fix basic engines, how to read people's intentions. But things at the main house were reaching a breaking point. One evening, the Sterlings hosted a dinner for a group of very influential people. Maya was seated at the end of the table, wearing a dress that cost more than most people made in a year. "Our Maya is such a blessing," Helena told the guests, her hand resting heavily on Maya's shoulder. "She's interested in going to a very prestigious university for public relations. She wants to follow in our footsteps." Maya felt a surge of nausea. She had never said she wanted to study public relations. She wanted to study law, specifically for kids in the system who had no voice. "Is that right, Maya?" A woman across the table asked, leaning in with a fake smile. "You want to be just like your mother?" The table went silent. Mr. Sterling looked at Maya, his eyes narrowing in a silent warning. He was telling her to play the part. He was telling her to be the furniture. Maya looked at Helena's hand on her shoulder. She thought about the night behind the study door. She thought about the blue suitcase in her closet and the granola bars she had been hiding for years. "I think," Maya said, her voice steady and clear, "that I've learned a lot about public relations just by living in this house. It's amazing how much you can change the truth if you have the right lighting and a good photographer." The smile on Helena's face didn't drop, but her fingers tightened on Maya's shoulder until it hurt. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat loudly. "She has such a sharp wit," he said to the guests, though his eyes were cold as ice. "We're very proud of her spirit." That night, after the guests left, the mask finally slipped. Mr. Sterling stormed into Maya's room. He didn't knock. "Don't you ever do that again," he hissed, his face red. "We have worked too hard for this. Do you have any idea how close we are? 2 more years, Maya. That's all you have to do. You stay quiet, you look pretty, and you don't say another word that isn't in the script. Do you understand me?" Maya didn't flinch. She stood up from her desk, looking him right in the eye. "And if I don't, what will you do? Send me back to the group home? You can't. If you do that, you lose the inheritance. You need me. I'm the only reason you're still living in this house." The silence that followed was terrifying. Mr. Sterling looked like he wanted to yell, but he realized she was right. He realized the furniture had started to speak back. He turned around and walked out. Slamming the door so hard, a picture fell off the wall. Maya sat back down. Her hands were shaking, but she felt a strange sense of peace. The battle lines were drawn. She knew she was in danger, but she also knew she was winning. She went to her closet and pulled out her old blue suitcase. It was battered and dusty, but it was still there. She reached into the lining and touched the money she had saved. She wasn't a 10-year-old girl anymore. She was a woman who was about to become the Sterlings' worst nightmare. She didn't need their love, and she certainly didn't need their money. She just needed time. The morning of Maya's 18th birthday didn't start with a party or a cake. It started with a cold realization. She was finally legally free. She woke up before the sun, watching the gray light crawl across the ceiling of the room that had never truly felt like hers. For 8 years, she had lived in this house as a ghost, a prop, and a secret. But today, the contract was over. She didn't rush. She moved with a calm, steady rhythm. She pulled the old, faded blue suitcase from the back of the closet. It looked tiny compared to the designer luggage Helena had bought her over the years, but it was the only thing in the room that actually belonged to her. Inside the lining, the money she had saved, the small bills from chores, the birthday cash from distant relatives, the coins she had found was neatly bundled. It wasn't a fortune, but it was her freedom. Downstairs, the house was humming with a different kind of energy. Mr. Sterling and Helena were in the dining room. There was a stack of legal documents on the table next to a bottle of expensive champagne. They weren't celebrating Maya's birth. They were celebrating the closing of the trust fund. Maya walked down the stairs, her footsteps heavy on the marble. She wasn't wearing the silk dress Helena had laid out for her. She was wearing a simple pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and her old sneakers. She carried the blue suitcase in her left hand. When she entered the dining room, The clinking of silverware stopped. Mr. Sterling looked up, a fake wide smile plastered on his face. There she is. The woman of the hour, he said, gesturing to a chair. Sit down, Maya. We have some papers for you to sign. It's a big day for all of us. Once these are finalized, your future is set. We've already looked at a lovely apartment for you near the university. And your monthly allowance will be more than enough to keep you comfortable. Maya didn't sit. She stood at the end of the table, the same place she had stood 8 years ago when she first arrived. I'm not signing anything, Maya said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Helena laughed, a high, nervous sound. Don't be silly, dear. You're probably just overwhelmed. It's a lot of responsibility, but we're here to manage it for you. We've already spoken to the lawyers. I know what you spoke to the lawyers about, Maya said. She walked closer to the table, looking at the two people who had pretended to be her parents. I've known since I was 10 years old. The color drained from Helena's face. Mr. Sterling's smile faltered, his eyes turning hard. What are you talking about? The night of the rainy Tuesday, Maya said. The study door wasn't closed. I went down to get a snack, and I heard you. I heard you say that I was a piece of furniture. I heard you say that you only needed me to look the part until the trust fund settled. I heard every single word. For a moment, the room was so silent you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. The perfect image of the Sterling family shattered right there between the breakfast plates and the champagne. Maya, you were a child, Mr. Sterling began, his voice dropping into a low, threatening growl. You misunderstood a frustrated conversation. We have given you everything. Look around you. Look at this house, your clothes, the opportunities we've provided. You didn't give me anything, Maya countered. You traded those things for my silence and my face. You used me to get a fortune that wasn't yours, and in return, you gave me a room in a house where nobody loved me. You weren't my parents. You were my captors. Helena stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. You ungrateful little girl. Do you have any idea where you'd be without us? You'd be nothing. You'd be just another statistic in the system. Maybe, Maya said, a small, sad smile appearing on her face, but I would have been a person. Not a prop. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. She placed it on the table. Over the last year, I've recorded a lot of conversations in this house, she lied. She didn't actually have much on the recorder, but the look of pure terror that crossed Mr. Sterling's face told her everything she needed to know. They were terrified of the truth. I don't want your apartment. I don't want your allowance. I'm leaving, and I'm taking my name back. Can't just walk away, Mr. Sterling hissed. The documents need your signature for the final release of the funds. Then I guess you're not getting the money, Maya said, because I will never sign a piece of paper that ties me to you for one more second. She turned around and walked toward the front door. She didn't look back at the art on the walls or the expensive furniture. She walked out onto the porch, where the air felt fresh and smelled of the rain from the night before. At the bottom of the steps, Mr. Henderson was waiting by his old beat-up truck. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and opened the passenger door. He had known this day was coming. He was the one who had helped her find a small room to rent in the city, far away from the iron gates and the lies. As the truck pulled away, Maya looked in the side mirror. She saw the great white house getting smaller and smaller. She saw Helena standing on the porch, looking tiny and fragile in her expensive clothes. Maya reached down and touched her blue suitcase. It was light, but it held everything she needed. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't wondering what people wanted from her. She wasn't playing a part, she was just Maya, and for the first time, that was enough. The city was loud, crowded, and smelled like exhaust and burnt coffee. But to Maya, every breath she took felt like pure oxygen. It had been exactly 1 year since she walked down the marble steps of the Sterling estate and climbed into the passenger seat of an old gardener's truck. She was 19 now. Her life didn't look like a magazine cover anymore. She loved it for that very reason. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery. The floors were uneven. The heater made a clanking sound every time it turned on. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television. But every inch of the space was hers. There were no cameras here. There were no scripts. There were no parents pretending to love her while calculating her worth in a trust fund. Maya sat at a small wooden table she had found at a thrift store. On the table sat a laptop, bought with the money she had saved in the lining of her blue suitcase, and a stack of law school applications. She had spent the last 12 months working 2 jobs, one at the bakery downstairs and another as a junior clerk in a small legal office that handled family law. She was exhausted most days, her feet aching and her eyes heavy, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the tiredness of a person building their own life. She picked up a pen and started to write her personal statement. The prompt asked, "Why do you want to pursue a career in law?" Maya looked out the window at the people walking below. She thought about the 10-year-old girl who had sat in a dark hallway and heard her life being traded away like a piece of stock. She thought about how many other kids were sitting in similar hallways right now, completely unaware that the people who were supposed to protect them were actually using them. "I want to be the person who listens," she wrote, her pen moving steadily across the paper. "In a world where children are often treated like accessories or tools for adult gain, I want to be the one who looks for the truth behind the closed doors." Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mr. Henderson. He had retired from the estate shortly after Maya left, unable to stand the atmosphere once the golden girl was gone. He now spent his days tending a community garden in the city. "The tomatoes are coming in. Stop by after your shift. I saved the best ones for you," the message read. Maya smiled. This was her family now. It wasn't built on blood or legal contracts or inheritance clauses. It was built on kindness and tomatoes and people who showed up when things weren't perfect. A few hours later, Maya walked through the community garden. The sun was setting, casting a warm, orange glow over the rows of green plants. Mr. Henderson was wearing his usual stained overalls, looking content. "You look different today," he said, handing her a brown paper bag filled with fresh vegetables. "Something happened." "I sent them," Maya said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "The applications. All of them." Mr. Henderson leaned on his shovel and nodded. "The Sterlings called my cell yesterday. First time in a year." Maya felt a slight chill, but it didn't scare her anymore. "What did they want?" "They're losing the house," he said simply. "Without your signature on those final release forms, the creditors moved in. The inheritance stayed locked up, and apparently they had borrowed a lot of money against it. They wanted to know if I knew where you were. They said they wanted to make things right." Maya looked at the rows of plants she had helped water. A year ago, that news might have made her feel guilty or even triumphant. Now, it just felt like a distant story about people she barely knew. "They don't want to make things right," Maya said. "They want to make their bank accounts right. Tell them you haven't seen me. Tell them the furniture moved out." Mr. Henderson laughed. "I already did. I told them you weren't a girl who could be found by people looking for a paycheck." As Maya walked back to her apartment, she passed a storefront with a television in the window. A news report was showing a local charity gala. She saw a couple who looked remarkably like the Sterlings, polished, smiling, and holding glasses of champagne. But as she watched, she noticed the way the woman's smile dropped the second the camera moved away. She saw the tension in the man's shoulders. She realized then that they were the ones who were trapped. They were the ones living in a cage of their own making, forever chasing a status that would never make them feel whole. Maya reached her front door and climbed the stairs. She unlocked her door and stepped into her messy, quiet, beautiful home. She went to her closet and pulled out the old blue suitcase. It was empty now, its contents replaced by her new life. She looked at it for a long moment before placing it on the top shelf. It was a reminder of where she had come from, but it no longer defined where she was going. She sat back down at her desk and picked up her pen. She had a lot more to write. She had a voice now, and she was going to use it to make sure that the next child who heard every word would have someone to turn to. Maya wasn't just a survivor. She was the author of her own story, and for the first time in her life, she was excited to see what happened in the next chapter. The silence in her apartment wasn't the heavy, scary silence of the estate. It was the quiet of a new beginning. The legal office where Maya worked was located in a basement. But to her, it felt brighter than the Sterling's mansion ever had. It was a place filled with the smell of old coffee and the sound of filing cabinets clicking shut. This was where the real world happened. People didn't come here to look perfect. They came here because their lives were messy and they needed help. Maya spent her days organizing files for a woman named Elena, not the Helena from her past, but a tired, brilliant lawyer who wore mismatched socks and actually cared about her clients. This Elena didn't care about Maya's background or the expensive dresses she used to wear. She only cared that Maya was fast, honest, and had a way of making scared children feel safe when they waited in the lobby. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the office. It wasn't a legal notice for a client. It was addressed to Maya personally. The return address was a law firm she recognized, the one that handled the Sterling estate. Her hand shook slightly as she slit the envelope open. Inside was a final plea. The Sterlings were facing a public disaster. Without the inheritance money that was tied to her signature, their creditors were moving to take everything. The letter didn't apologize. Instead, it tried to bargain. It offered her a small percentage of the money if she would just sign the papers and save the family reputation. They even included a handwritten note from Helena, saying how much they missed her and how they wanted to have a proper birthday dinner to celebrate her success. Maya read the note twice. A year ago, this would have made her angry. 2 years ago, it might have made her cry. But now it felt like reading a script from a movie she didn't like very much. She realized they still didn't see her. They didn't see the woman who worked 2 jobs. They didn't see the woman who was studying for the entrance exams. They only saw a missing signature. She walked over to the paper shredder in the corner of the office. She didn't hesitate. She fed the letter and the note into the machine, watching as the lies were turned into thin strips of white confetti. She didn't need their dinner, and she certainly didn't need their percentage. "Everything okay?" Alina asked, looking up from a mountain of paperwork. "Everything is perfect," Maya said. "Just clearing out some old trash." That evening, Maya met Mr. Henderson at the community garden. The air was starting to turn crisp as autumn approached. They sat on a bench made of reclaimed wood, watching a group of local kids play tag between the rows of kale and tomatoes. "They sent a letter," Maya told him. Mr. Henderson didn't need to ask who. And I realized something," she said, leaning back. "They spent 8 years trying to teach me that money was the most important thing in the world. They thought that if they gave me enough things, I would forget who I was. But all they really taught me was how to be alone. Now that I'm not alone anymore, now that I have this, and you, and my work, their money has no power." Mr. Henderson smiled, his eyes crinkling. "That's the secret, Maya. Power isn't about how much you can buy. It's about how much you don't need." As the weeks went by, Maya's life continued to grow. She received her first acceptance letter from a local university. It wasn't the prestigious Ivy League school Helena had dreamed of for the sake of her social standing. It was a humble, hard-working school known for its social justice program. When Maya saw the accepted stamp, she didn't call the Sterlings. She called Mr. Henderson. And then she treated Alina to a cheap lunch at the deli next door. The story of the Sterling family eventually hit the local news. It wasn't the headline they wanted. There were reports of a mysterious financial collapse and a loss of assets. There was a photo of Mr. Sterling leaving a courthouse, looking old and tired. His expensive suit looking a bit too big for him. Maya saw the news on a television in a shop window while she was walking home. She paused for a moment, looking at the man who had once told her she was a piece of furniture. She felt a flicker of pity, but it passed quickly. He had lived his life for an image, and now the image was gone, leaving him with nothing. She turned away from the window and kept walking. She had a long night of studying ahead of her. She had a future to build, and for the first time in her life, she was the one holding the pen. When she got back to her small apartment, she noticed a small flower pot on her doorstep. It was a hardy little plant with bright green leaves, left there by Mr. Henderson. There was a note tucked into the soil that said, "This one grows anywhere, even in the cracks of the sidewalk." It reminded me of you. Maya carried the plant inside and placed it on her windowsill. It looked small and a bit messy, but it was alive. It was real. She sat down at her desk, opened her books, and began to work. The girl who had heard every word had finally found her own words, and she was never going to be silent again.